alliteration. That is the repetition of an initial consonant sound, the H, her, hardest, hew, to hold. And what is the point of this alliteration? There are many points, but, I don't want to make it too complex and, turn people off. The idea here of this alliteration is to emphasize, the transformation, the impermanence of everything in the world, and in this case, in nature. The third line, again, Robert Frost uses a paradox. He says, her early leaves a flower. When you read that, you get a little confused. It says, what do you mean? Is her early leaf is not a leaf, but it's a flower? Well, he's trying to say that this leaf is also so precious that it becomes a flower in its beauty. It's sort of identical to a flower. And then, again, with a simple statement that ends with a period, but only so an hour, he tells us that this leaf that is gorgeous, that is marvelous, and looks like a flower, lasts only an hour, has a very, very, very short life. And then, again, he suggests the idea of motion. Then leaf subsides to leaf. Then the leaves come, some dry up, some wilt, and new ones come. And, the poem suddenly stops, and he makes a jump in the sixth verse. Verse in poetry is, a line. And he goes and he makes, an allusion to the Bible. And he says, just as in nature, things change, in Eden, culturally, we think that Eden is the perfect place. Nothing changes in Eden. It's perfect. You don't work, you live forever. There's no mutability. But Frost said, even in Eden, things change. Adam and Eve, from Genesis, the story, were kicked out of Eden. So their life, their perfect life, sank to grief, descended, became sad, sorrowful. Grief means sorrow. And again, having made that cultural, philosophical, biblical allusion, he jumps, again, he returns to the natural cycle that he is observing. And he says, just as Eden couldn't last, the same thing happens to our days. Dawns, which are really the most beautiful time of day for some of us, doesn't last. You see a beautiful dawn, the sun coming out, but soon it's transformed into a day, and then it becomes dusk and night, and then the cycle continues. And at the end, having gone through all these transformations, from something very minimal, like the birth of a leaf, to, the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, to the change of the day from dawn to day and night, he frames the poem with the title, the phrase he used in the title, nothing gold can stay. Beauty essentially is short-lived. So, having given you questions to work with the poem, and as I said, in literature, and this is, very, I think, comforting, you know, there are no fixed answers. It's not mathematics. This is not algebra. You know, of course, if you tell me that nothing gold can stay is about circus life, it's wrong. You know, it doesn't make sense. But you can, you know, reflect and expand meanings and read things differently. And, you know, as I said, you know, there are no set answers, you know, and that promotes discussion. And we want our students to discuss, to exchange opinions, to disagree. That's very healthy in nice terms, obviously, and to develop their linguistic skills. A final activity that I've prepared is paraphrasing, you know, and this, you know, the previous activities can be done orally, you know, identify, define the situation, describe the structure, refer to the themes, answer these questions, do true and false. All those can be done orally in a classroom discussion, in a debate, in, you know, group activities, etc. But paraphrase points or tries to develop writing skills. First, the concept of paraphrase. What is to paraphrase? You know, to paraphrase, I've given you a fancy definition there, is the paraphrase is a restatement of the text which retains its meaning without changing the words. In a simpler way, is to paraphrase is to say what's in the poem in your own words. Paraphrase, mind you, that's important, paraphrase is not interpretation. No, when I ask people to paraphrase, I'm not saying, look, what is Frost saying about death? What's Frost saying about change? No. Tell me exactly what he's saying, literally. That is paraphrase. And sometimes it can be difficult to get students to focus on that activity. You know, be as literal as you can. And there you have my paraphrase, you know. You can read it there. I have discussed Frost, and you, I hope, have learned a lot of things. You know, you have learned about meaning, you have learned some literary terms like theme, structure, situation, symbols, paradox, alliteration, etc. I also brought another poem which is slightly different. It's by an American poet of the 1920s who was also a painter. And he was not as, in his use of language, you know, he was not as precious or as elaborate as Frost. You know, Frost used simple words, but his rhyme scheme, everything was very perfect. Williams liked colloquial language, street language. And for us Chilenos, Williams is very important because he inspired Nicanor Parra. You know, Nicanor Parra, who apparently speaks good English, read a lot of William Carlos Williams and was enchanted by his new use of language. And my idea is that you read this poem, munching, you know, I'll read it for you, but then in your private moments, after having listened to this class, you reread it, and then you will answer the questions that will follow. But I will read them to you and give you a few pointers. Munching a plum on the street, a paper bag. ¿Puedo empezar de nuevo?
Sí, remontamos de nuevo.
Ya.
37:52, Dani. Y atenta, vamos a la lectura, acción.
Ya. munching a plum on the street, a